There's no easy way to say this, but Porsche has fitted the Boxster with a 4-cylinder engine. I know. Stay calm though. Porsche has form here. It sometimes makes big changes to its cars that look like they might end in complete disaster, but somehow they make it work. But 4 cylinders and a turbo in a Boxster? Even I'm worried this time. This is a Boxster S. It has 350 horsepower and 310 foot-pounds, which means 0 to 60 in 4.4 seconds, 0 to 100 in well under 10 seconds, and 177 miles an hour all out. That's seriously fast. There's a little more weight, some new suspension components, and everything's generally firmer than before. This really is a very confusing car from where I'm sitting. On the one hand, Porsche has undeniably made the Boxster faster and probably objectively a bit better, because the chassis comes alive a bit more with the extra torque, and it's just so fast. And I can't deny that for a turbocharged engine, the throttle response is brilliant, and the end result, in terms of how it clips you up the road, is very impressive. You're just waiting for the but, aren't you? There's an enormous but, and that is that emotionally, this thing doesn't even operate on anything like the same level as the last car. Remember that lovely 6-cylinder engine that used to howl and wail and give you 9 different sounds depending on where it was in the rev range? All gone, sorry. Lost, forgotten, in the past. This thing is inert. There's so little to be had emotionally, and that means you kind of have to drive it in a way that gives you the speed. And that was never the case with the Boxster. So what we have here is a car that's had a personality transplant. And I'm not sure it's a personality I necessarily like as much as the old one. It's gone from being this delicate, sharp, mid-engine thing to being a bit blunt. I think this feels a bit M3-ish at times. It's gone from being delicate to being a bit of a thug. The problems begin the moment you start the car, because you initially think, that sounds like a Beetle, then you think that sounds a bit like a Subaru, and then as you get going, you almost lose that flat 4 character, and it sounds like any other inline 4-cylinder engine, which is so disappointing given how brilliantly musical the old 6-cylinder engine was. But there are 2 different sound personalities to this car. Roof down, I don't really like the sound of it. You lose any fun noise. You of course got all this rustle up here, and that's not very enjoyable. Roof up, it does sound a bit more angry. There's some more personality. And of course, Porsche has tried quite hard to inject some more into it. So, with the Sport button on, or the Sport Manatino turned, you get a lot more banging and popping, but it is kind of falsified. It isn't real, lovely noise. As for the way it drives, well, being a Porsche, you can't really fault it, can you? The steering's fantastic. They've added more support into the chassis so it corners flatter, but somehow the ride hasn't deteriorated. I can't really fault the brakes. Can you see what I'm getting at here? Yes, they've made the Boxster worse, but it's still rather brilliant. I just wish they hadn't spoilt it. If the obvious downsides to this new engine are a lack of accuracy from throttle response compared to a normally aspirated motor and some loss of noise, well, there are some obvious upsides too. First of all, this thing's now damn fast. I mean, stupidly fast. If you own a Cayman GT4 and one of these comes up behind you, I wouldn't get involved. Secondly, it has an effect on the chassis. People like me have wanted to know how a Boxster with a load more power and torque would perform. And now we've got it, I do feel a bit like the kid in the sweet shop who's complaining of a tummy ache after the event, because yes, there's a whole load more fun. This one's got a slippy diff and you can slide it around, and it's great fun, and it's a bit of a yobbo. But I'm not sure a Boxster should be about that. I think it should be about accuracy, and I've lost a bit of that accuracy, particularly in the first phase of a corner where it understeers a bit now, which it didn't before. But the rest of it is so damn good. The chassis really is, apart from those niggles, fantastic. The brakes are fantastic, the control weights are fantastic. The cabin, you can't really fault it. The new PCM touchscreen thing is superb. I love the fact you can have a manual gearbox, and of course, it is supposedly more efficient. The roof mechanism, best in class, and all in all, a great little car. Just not quite as good as the one you could have bought last year.
bit of training in. Got some manual cars coming up. Got to get that left leg ready for the clutch pedal.
The Aston V12 Vantage S and the 911R are road cars. They shouldn't be driven on a circuit, they should be enjoyed on the road. So that's where we'll begin this test, on a road. A rather beautiful road.
Now, if I had 20 minutes, I could just spend all of them being super excited about the fact that there's an Aston Martin with a V12 normally aspirated engine and a manual gearbox. But I need to get over that and try and tell you what's good about this car. Because much as I think the concept's brilliant, of course it's not perfect. The good stuff. Well, first of all, the gear shift is positive. I'll give it that. There's some other aspects to it that are not quite right. But to me, it unleashes the full V12 Vantage S driving experience that just wasn't there with the paddles. I feel so much more in control of the car. It also unleashes what I call the third gear factor. This car has 7 forward gears. As a matter of fact, with all that torque, it needs about 2 forward gears. But the reality is third gear is just wonderful. Here we go, I'm going to put it in third now. We're doing about 20 miles an hour and it just goes. It just goes. It just goes. I'm not going to tell you how fast we're going, but it's sufficient. I love that surge, and I love the way that these gear ratios work with the spread of power and torque in this engine, because it's just fantastic. That engine, all that power, all that V12, all that majesty, it just sounds fantastic. Who needs turbochargers? This thing just goes from zip all the way to 7,000 RPM, and it sounds, well, you can hear what it sounds like. It is perfection. It really is a great, great engine. This is a very approachable car as well. It's quite delicate on the road. You feel that relationship between what your right foot's doing and the amount of traction you have. You can let the car just take little slides, not even slides, you just feel a suggestion of movement at the back. The Porsche is more rigid, doesn't feel like that. This car is a bit lazier, everything feels a bit softer, so your inputs are adjusted accordingly. The steering is delicious. I think in terms of steering feel, if there is such a thing, this car feels better connected than the Porsche, certainly. There's ample grip, but you can unstick it in pretty much any way you want to, even 4th and 5th on some slip roads. It's got that much power and torque. The cabin, okay, it's getting old now, but I feel cozy and comfortable. I love the size of the car. Are you getting what I'm sort of trying to tell you here? I really like this car. I don't think it's the best car Aston makes technically or objectively, but I do think that as an object to drive and to be in, it's the most exciting car they make. It's just bristling with enthusiasm. It just wants to get going the whole time, so I'm gonna let it go. This gear lever then, it's not perfect. The position of it is a little bit too far backwards for me. Maybe that's just because I'm a bit simming in the wrong shape, but it isn't quite right ergonomically. The dog leg, it's a novelty, but I'd rather it was just a normal layout, I have to say, but I get used to it. This is not a gear lever that you don't think about, but I can flip that on its head because it's a car you have to think about driving. And I love the fact that when you first drive it, you get it all a bit wrong and you don't know where you are. And then over time you learn it. It's a car that you learn. It's a car that encourages you to get better at what you're doing. It does blips on downshifts for you if you want it to. It even has a flat shift function that allows you to just dip the clutch and yank the lever back and it will do it for you. So it's a car that has some idiosyncrasies. It feels like a modern interpretation of a slightly old, very fast racing car. That might not win you group tests and things like that, but you know what? It's a very endearing thing to live with because it means that you're always thinking. So even here in a 40 mile an hour zone, I'm thinking about, have I got the right gear? How much do I have to push the lever? It's old-fashioned driving. I really enjoy it. And then when you want to open it up, wow. It's a bit traction limited. The 295 tyre is probably too narrow for the amount of torque. The body shell doesn't feel that rigid next to the Porsches. There are lots of problems with this car. But, as you'll find in a minute when we take it onto a circuit and let it dance around, it has got so much personality. It's a sad thing to say that it probably is the last time we're going to see the V12 Vantage S. We won't see a normally aspirated Aston Martin again of this type. And I think anyone that's got one of these should be very, very pleased with their purchase. I think it is an instant classic.
You must have read endless stories about this thing in advance. It is the 911R, and for all its on-paper brilliance, do you not agree with me? There's a suspicion that it might just be the most overhyped car of the last 5 years. I mean, everyone expects this thing to be mind-bendingly brilliant. And I'm really keen for it not to be brilliant. Which means I'm massively disappointed because it's, wait for it, brilliant. Yes, how irritating. But the raw materials are so good. A GT3RS engine, this new 6-speed, all-new manual gearbox with 3 pedals, no wings, no nothing, a chassis designed for road driving and not for ultimate lap times. And yes, what a surprise. Once again, Mr. Preuninger and his team have made an absolutely fantastic motor car. It's a car that even at low speed is enjoyable to drive. That's the key to it. You don't have to be up it the whole time. But when you are, my lord, I don't know how much power you lose in the PDK transmission, but this thing in the gears feels quicker than an RS. It must be 30-40 horsepower more. Right, I'll gather my thoughts because I'm getting a bit kind of frothy and excited about it because it's so good. Let's start with the steering. Electric power steering, 4-wheel steering, supposed to be totally corrupted and no good. Well, when I first drove a 991 with electric assistance in 2011, I thought Porsche had lost their minds. 5 years later, this is probably the best steering on any road car. It's incredible. It's so agile, it's so intuitive. It really is as good as you could imagine it being in a 911. It's fantastic. The engine itself, interestingly, they've taken out a load of sound deadening to make it feel a bit more exciting. The result is it's quite gravelly and rough at low revs, and the single mass flywheel, well, that chunters away like a racing car. They're very mechanical, raw noises. I wouldn't say they're necessarily musical or pleasant. The Aston certainly is a nicer sounding engine, but this thing, once you get going, it's spectacular. I'll give you a little burp in a moment, but for now, let's carry on talking, because I like talking about this car. The interior, well, you've already seen that. It's masterful. It's just wonderful to sit in. I can't really find much wrong with it as a road car. The chassis, well, they've softened it off a bit. I just run it without the dampers in the stiff mode. Do you know what? It's just about on the edge of what you can drive on a British B road, so therefore it's about perfect. The way it accrues revs from 5,000 to 8,500 has to be felt to be believed. It really does. This is possibly the best engine and gearbox combination on sale at the moment. I can't think of anything I enjoy more. It's a car that you can use just like a normal Carrera. This is where Porsche is so down with their game. When you want it to feel hardcore and special, it does. But if you wanted to knock it in 6 and drive straight to Nice, it wouldn't be a problem at all. The carbon ceramics are fantastic on the road. The grip from the Cup 2 Michelin's is fantastic. And furthermore, when it rains, you don't fall off. I mean, again, I'm going to scratch the old noggin and try and work out what's wrong with it. What's wrong with the car? What's wrong with the car? What's wrong with the car? Hasn't got rear seats. It hasn't got rear seats. That for me is a massive problem, a huge problem. Porsche, you failed. There are no rear seats.
Now, I know we agreed these were road cars, but they're so damn fast, and I'm so damn curious to see what they do when the power overcomes the grip that we just have to drive them at Anglesey. The V12 Vantage S manual is nothing more than a 3-pedal version of the paddle shifter. The gearbox uses the same internals, and power remains the same at a vast 573 horsepower. It is now 0.2 slower from rest to 60 miles an hour, like anyone gives a hoot. Having 447 foot-pounds of torque is quite handy, but then the little Aston is a bit of a 1,665 kilogram chubster. Top speed is 205 miles an hour. It costs £140,495, and best of all, Aston, unlike Porsche, will actually sell you one.
It's not an out-and-out track car, but it does have a track mode for the dampers and a track mode for the DSC, which I've turned off incidentally. So let's see what it's like, because these things are so fast you have to use them on circuit, don't you? This is the bottom hairpin at Anglesey, and watch this, 3rd gear, and I have to manage it on the way out because it wants to oversteer. That's how much torque there is. Engine revs out beautifully, gear shift feels intuitive round here. Front of the car, there's a bit of understeer. It's on a P0 Corsa tyre, but because you've got so much torque, You can pretty much neutralise it anytime you want. It does, however, have that age-old Aston problem with those awful viscous differentials that just don't seem to want to hook up. So you have to be a bit careful with the throttle input, otherwise one wheel does do a bonfire. I don't like that so much. But it's an accurate thing. It really is. And I love the fact that you just go up the torque and it just feels seamless. Brakes, carbon ceramics all around, really, really good, strong, powerful brakes. Listen to that noise. It's a fast car too. It doesn't feel fast because it's not so energetic to drive. You'll see in the Porsche that I can really get up it and grab it by the scruff of the neck. This car you stroke along a bit more, so you don't use such violent inputs. But you know what? When you look at the results, it's actually going very, very, very fast indeed. It's just enjoyable. It's a great thing about Aston. They know how to make cars that flatter you and make you feel special. Listen to that noise. Anyhow, I wonder what happens if we sort of throw it around a bit. Third gear. Yes, it really is. Any angle you want. This hairpin, again, third gear, and you just give it half a boot and it's around. And because it's a transaxle and because it's front engine and rear wheel drive, the balance is just lovely. I'm not going to do the really, really fast one because Neil's sitting next to me and he might throw up. We don't want him to be sick, do we? The car feels mega through here. Just nudge it in, bit of oversteer, car's trying to go through, and then of course the transition. Just a bit of a bootful there, sends it, and then it just goes back the other way. I'll tell you what, the viscous diff may be a bit rubbish and sometimes stays open and sometimes feels asymmetrical and they get bad when they're older, but fundamentally this car is an absolute riot. It's easier to do this in than it is the Porsche. I just think it's wonderful fun. And you know what? I'm having more fun because I've got this thing to stir around too. All in all, the old style might be better. This might be more fun than paddles. I really do think so. Aston, thank you for giving us a manual gearbox. I thoroughly appreciate it. All is well with the world.
If you like your fast 911s, you'll love the details on the 911R. It's dripping with old school references like houndstooth fabric and even green instrument needles and digits. It weighs just 1,370 kilograms, so the 500 horsepower and 339 foot-pounds may look less than the Aston, but in reality, it's the more accelerative car. You can even spec a single mass flywheel and remove the radio and air conditioning for the full lightweight experience.
I know it's not a track car, but to drive it really fast, you need to find a space that's private, and those are called racetracks, so we need to come to a racetrack. And that means I'll talk about it sort of in terms of being on a racetrack. The engine, wow. The turn-in, wow. All in all, it's a more athletic car than that Aston. It's just so good. The brakes, wow. Everything about this car just feels like it's dialed into your synapses. Just imagine how you want a performance car to be. The 911R's kind of that car. It's just superb. Okay, the front axle compared to a GT3RS doesn't have quite the same grip when you turn in. It's a narrower tyre, and it doesn't have all the aero either, so on a fast circuit it can't quite live with the RS, but it feels quicker in the intermediate gears. I just love the balance of the car. Look what I'm doing here. I'm doing that myself. I'm heeling and towing. It's allowing me to drive the car. And ultimately, it's only as good as my inputs. So if my inputs are shabby, the car's shabby. Gear shift is really superb. It's quick, it's short, but unlike some of the old RSs, it's not too full of resistance. It's an easier lever to push and pull. ABS is just superb. The traction control is just superb. The stability control, I mean, again, it's quite difficult to find fault with the car, which makes it quite difficult to talk around the lap. So all I can do is tell you how flipping good it is. Oh, and by the way, can you hear the noise it's making? Because that is, surprise, surprise, really, really good. Oh, I mean, that's driving. That's the essence of driving. That's why we all love driving cars. Oh, Well, anyhow, the bit that we really need to do on the circuit is to let it move around. But I can't do this on the public highway, because this is third gear and about 85 miles an hour. Yes. And it feels so alive and so connected. That's where it's a bit different to the Aston. The Aston just feels like it's a bit lazier. This car, I mean, you'd swear it was flipping spherical bearings everywhere. You just feel such a great sense of connection between your inputs and the car, be it the chassis or the powertrain. Everything you do it's kind of, feels like it wants you to do it with full intention. How do they make a rear-engine car do that? I mean, it shouldn't be able to do that, should it? Oh, and then you get to look at Snowdonia ahead of you. Yeah. I think the 911R at Anglesey, even though it's not supposed to be a track car, is one of the best things I've done in the last 10 years. Yes! It just keeps pulling. It feels so fast. One potential criticism I had before I drove it was, well, hang on a minute, couldn't they just gear it not to do 200 miles an hour? But it's so explosive in the intermediate ratios. I think they had to gear it to do that. It wouldn't be drivable otherwise. Yes, it's another masterclass from Porsche.
This is the most alluring, most intense road car Aston has produced. It's a stunning end to the Vantage bloodline, but the 911R is one of the standout machines of the past decade. It reminds us that Porsche hasn't forgotten what driving is all about. Every time someone tries to beat the 911 GT3RS, it only serves to remind us that Porsche really is the king of the fast road track weapon category. But the new AMG GTR from Mercedes is the most serious challenger we've seen for years, and BMW's M4 GTS looks, on paper, like it could give the Porsche a headache too. Let's go and slide.
This is the AMG GTR, which is massively confusing because I thought all GTRs were Nissans. As you can see, on first acquaintance, blimey O'Reilly. This, on a cold, damp day, is a real handful. You have to be quite quick with your hands, but when you get there, it's got some balance. Now, it's a bit slippery, but earlier I drove this thing when it was dry, and I was mighty impressed. From the front of the car, really, really great front end grip. Like everything else in the class, it's got this Cup 2 Michelin, which is so clever and so sticky. But these super wide tracks on this car give it such a planted feel. Doesn't take much steering lock, and you just turn the car in and it goes there. And it's fast and it's grippy. Come back a bit further, it's got really good balance front to rear. Oh. And the steering is just the right speed for the way the car wants to move. So it's quite slidable, but also very, very sharp and accurate you want it to be. Engine, it's just magnificent, isn't it? It's so powerful. There's so much torque from those turbochargers, but then it wants to go at the top end as well. I think what I find most impressive is that this is an easier car to drive fast than the standard AMG GT and S. I've not driven this new C version, but this is a joy, this thing. I mean, it's so clear already that for me, this surely is going to be about this in the Porsche. I can't believe that BMW can live with this thing. This is a seriously fast car, and it feels so flat as well. I've got the dampers in the middle setting. Just feels super composed. Kind of butchers the road into submission.
The changes from GTS to GTR are actually too numerous to list here, but here's some. Power is up to 585 horsepower, boost is up from 1.2 to 1.35 bar. Wider wings cover 46mm front and 57mm rear track increases. There are closer gear ratios, a lower final drive, rear wheel steering, active front aero, a carbon prop shaft, new springs and dampers.
Yeah, you get the gist. This is a very, very serious piece of kit. And all that costs $143,000, which is strange because that's what people are currently asking for a second-hand BMW M4 GTS. Is the BMW really good enough to justify that?
Driving position, really good. Steering wheel, about where I need it. I'm not sitting too low so I can see down the bonnet line. Listen to that noise. This is some very, very good work from AMG. I'm much more impressed than I expected to be. This is a proper rival to the Porsche RS. Didn't think I'd be saying that. As for the poor BMW, well, my first experience with that car was a lot less than positive. Right now, I'll be amazed if it can get anywhere near this thing. Let's find out. Now the weather's changed a bit, as you might have seen, so I can't tell you too much objectively about what I'm doing right now, but I can tell you about what it was like to drive earlier when it was a bit drier. This is silly now. In fact, to do this and concentrate and talk at the same time might be problematic. So, what you need to know about the M4 GTS is that I'm not a massive fan. I think the cabin's special. I think it looks okay from the outside. The gold accents, maybe not what I want. But I don't really get it as a package because people are asking £140,000 sterling for these, you know, over list price. And I know they're rare, but this just gets absolutely lunched by the Mercedes and the Porsche.
BMW has squeezed 500 horsepower from the M3's 3-litre turbocharged 6, and it's lighter than the AMG, even with the new water injection system and its tank in the boot. But this is ultimately a 3 Series shell. There are lightweight materials everywhere. The front splitter is adjustable. There are 3-way coilovers, bigger roll bars, a titanium exhaust, and the roll cage is optional. But you'd have it, of course you would.
It feels too upright, it feels too much like a saloon car. The suspension doesn't feel sorted at all, it's jittery everywhere, it doesn't really want to absorb bumps, but then it feels quite lazy as well, so it feels weirdly soft, but doesn't feel supple, and yet it lacks control. So it's a very frustrating package. The engine, the boost, the way it arrives is really quite difficult to manage at times, and you find it just arrives like that, and you think, oh my lord. So, of all the cars, it's the most difficult to drive, but it's not the most rewarding, and it's comfortably the slowest. The brakes are okay. In anything other than perfectly dry conditions, I'd take an M3 30th anniversary saloon over this. Every single time I really would, because I just think it's a nicer car to drive. I mean, you can skid it about, that's all very well, but it should be able to do more than that, shouldn't it? It sounds good. The gold roll cage is quite amusing. But I expect so much more from this car. I didn't like it the first time I drove it, and today hasn't altered that opinion. Not their finest moment, but the M2's amazing, the M3 saloon I love. It just doesn't work for me. Frustrating, because it should do. It should be the perfect car for me. I should love this thing. I should want to own one. In these conditions, it's nigh on lethal. Yeah, I think that's enough. I think actually, that's enough, Chris. So this is the one they all want to beat, and they have to beat, because the GT3RS is the finest road-going track tool that does it all, isn't it? Although, sadly, most of the ones that have been sold in the UK appear to sit in people's garages not being used, so people can speculate on them, but that's another subject altogether. This car is magnificent, and this particular example has done 30,000 hard miles in the hands of idiots like me, and it still feels tight. XLG is a legend. So what is it that makes this car so special? Well, The weather today is terrible, so it's not at its best, it has to be said, because Porsches struggle to make their front ends work at the best of times. But this car just has got what you need. So, the front axle works. That extra track width means we've got a very wide front tyre, so the car turns well. The steering is the best here by a mile. The AMG steering is good and accurate and gives you a good sense of resistance when you put input through it. The way it turns is just remarkable. It's got traction because it's rear-ended and that massive rear tyre, which is straight from the 918 Spider. And then you've got that engine, normally aspirated, revs to well over 8,500 RPM. It's just so exciting. And you get more and more the higher up you go. Gearbox, the best here, the fastest changes. Listen to that, it's so exciting.
And part of the reason why I have to be critical of the GTS is that this orange car exists. The GT3RS, the one they all want to beat. You know this car by now. 4-litre atmospheric flat 6, 8,500 RPM, lighter than the others, massive wings, wider tracks than a GT3, vents on the front arches. It's basically a racing car with number plates, and if you're serious about track driving, it's just about perfect.
It's got the most aerodynamics of any car here. You just know that you could pound round the Nürburgring for a weekend and then just come home again and it would be absolutely fine. And I think that's part of its appeal, is it's just so robust, but it's so exciting. Can you hear that noise? Wow. And yet, it's got aircon, it's got Bluetooth, it's got a decent hi-fi. The AMG runs this thing very, very close. In fact, closer than any car I've ever driven against a GT3RS of any type, be it 996 or 997. But there's an emotional aspect, a sense of connection about this Porsche that even the Merc can't match. The normally aspirated engine is so important to that, but so is the steering, so is the way it looks. It's just immense, and it is, even 2 years after it was launched, the best car of its type. Merc, well done. BMW, must try harder. Porsche, still a daddy.